the mid-Atlantic ridge got wider. As these ridges widened, as Walt Brown says, it's going to spring up. The basalt will bounce up in the center, and the plates will slide away. So there was movement of the plates, but that's not proof for Pangaea. Now what happened, as the basalt springs up, it's going to crack, and water's going to fill in the cracks. Now today, they're not only full of water, they're full of sediments. It's been 400 years since the flood. The cracks are gone. They're all full of dirt. But when they measured the magnetic intensity, what they were actually finding were the cracks where the water rushed in. Because as basalt cools down, it stores a stronger magnetic field. If the basalt is hot, it doesn't store a magnetic field. You can put a magnet in your oven, heat it up, it'll lose its magnetic strength. So it's simply finding the cracks where the earth busted up into plates. That's all they're finding. Get the book if you want. Well, he's got a whole section on that in his book here in the beginning. Hot basalt loses its magnetism, and cold basalt stores a strong magnetic field. So that's what they were finding at the bottom of the mid-Atlantic ridge. There are no places where a north-seeking compass points south. Now, it is true there is still a little bit of subduction today, as in, plates of the earth are being drawn under. If you ever cook pudding or something, and it develops a skin on it, sometimes the skin on the pudding all of a sudden will just sink to the bottom. And if you push it down in one place, it'll draw more down with it, okay? I think some of that is happening, or has happened, with the crust of the earth. Sections have slid down under. Hawaii, for instance, is over a hot spot, and it appears to be moving. I think there is plate subduction right there. But I don't think it's been going on for millions of years. The other factor that really is confusing for evolutionists is, when you look at the bottom of the ocean, there's not much sediment down there. All the dirt washes into the oceans. You'd think the oceans would fill up with dirt. But when they check it out, there's only a few thousand years worth of dirt down there. So why don't the oceans have huge layers of really, really deep sediment? Well, one theory is they're not millions of years old. The other theory is, well, it's being recycled, it's being pulled under. That's why this plate movement theory is so important to the evolutionist. They have actually several serious problems they're trying to overcome. We'll cover in a minute. It's true there seems to be a little bit of plate subduction sliding under other plates. I agree. It's true the earth is busted up. We have fault lines. I agree. That doesn't prove it's been going for millions of years. The plates are moving, but it doesn't prove time, okay? And it doesn't prove the rate we see today has always been the same. I think Walt Brown's hydroplate theory is excellent. As the water's escaping from underneath, it's going to provide lubrication to slide these things faster. Today, there's very little water left down there. And students, I think, ought to be taught there are other options to this one silly theory. We live right here in Pensacola, Florida. My place is 2.6 miles south of Interstate 10, off Highway 29. If I go up to the interstate and stand there and I watch somebody headed east toward Jacksonville, does that prove he started in Los Angeles 4 days ago? No, they might have just got on at the next exit down there, right? The fact that we see the plates moving does not prove anything as far as time. Here's the flaw in their logic. They look at the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean spreading about 3 centimeters a year, about an inch, a little over an inch a year it is spreading. And they'll say, see, look at the distance across there. It's so many thousand miles and 1 inch a year. That proves, blah, 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 millions of years. That proves you're making some assumptions in your calculations. That's all that proves, okay? Plus, they're forgetting the continental shelf, and forgetting the shapes of the continents is just a pure coincidence. If you raise the water 600 feet, from here to the highway, Chicago is underwater. The oceans average 12,000 feet deep. Just a 600-foot change would put Chicago underwater. We'll show more on that in the second session here. Continental drift theory in the textbooks is trying to avoid two embarrassing problems. Number one, the magnetic field's getting weaker, saying the Earth is young, and there's not much dirt in the bottom of the ocean, saying the Earth is young. Those are two evidences of a young Earth that they're trying desperately to avoid with their continental drift theory. Okay, so what about the Ice Age? Is it true that the Earth was covered with ice? Well, maybe not the whole Earth, but there was ice all the way down to Kansas City, Missouri. I was just up in, I've just been everywhere. I was in British Columbia day before yesterday. Someplace where they have these large terminal moraines and drumlins, big, huge piles of rocks. As I studied this for years in earth science, it's fascinating to see ice, when it melts back, leaves behind a pile of rocks. When I was in Washington climbing Mount Rainier, my sister lives out there, they had a picture of this huge pile of rocks and somebody standing on top of it in front of this big glacier. They're going to get their picture taken. The man's up there standing on this massive pile of big boulders, and he's smiling, not realizing, why that pile of boulders is there? They're coming off the top of that glacier. So his wife takes the picture just as one about the size of a basketball falls down just behind his head from about 130 feet up. If that would hit him on the head, he'd have to open his shirt to eat the rest of his life, man. Glaciers leave behind piles of rocks when they melt back. If it's on the side, it's called a lateral moraine. If it's in front, it's called a terminal moraine. But there's no question there is obvious evidence the Earth had an ice age. All over Ohio and Indiana, from a famous drumlin where ice carved around a hill, is Bunker's Hill or Breed's Hill, where the Revolutionary War started. That's formed by ice. There's no question there was an ice age, but the question is, where does it fit into the Bible? And was it really millions of years ago? As these glaciers plow ahead, they leave behind all these rocks, and they melt back, and the rocks stay there. And all over places in Illinois and Ohio, you see these piles. If you dig down in, you hit big boulders. And they're usually rounded, smooth boulders. So, what caused the ice age? We're going to cover that in the Hovind theory. And what froze the mammoths? Those big, hairy, hippie elephants that are found frozen, standing up, sometimes, food still in their mouth. The Beresovka mammoth, found in 1901, was a famous one. Part of the trunk and front foot had been eaten by wolves, apparently, but the rest of it was still frozen in the ground. They dug it out, it's in a museum in Russia. How do you freeze an elephant standing up? And it's not just one, I mean many thousands. In 1 year, they removed 20,000 pairs of tusks. 1 year. It's called fossil ivory. This is one right here, a small one from a baby one. I've got a friend in Alaska that goes over to Siberia, and he buys and trades in fossil ivory. He carves things out of it. Amazing, beautiful little carvings out of, ancient ivory that was frozen. Well, how do you freeze an elephant? It's not just one. Walt Brown's got a page in his book here about the map showing where all the different frozen mammoth and frozen rhinoceros are found, frozen camels near the North Pole, frozen bobcat. What happened? How do you explain this from a biblical worldview? Well, some of the mammoths are frozen standing up, not all of them. So they have undigested food still in their stomach and still in their teeth. They didn't even swallow their last bite. They died of suffocation. There's no water found in the lungs. And the small ice crystals in the blood indicate they probably froze in less than 5 hours. How do you freeze an elephant in less than 5 hours? I got curious about this, so I called Bird's Eye frozen food people in New York. I called physics professors, I called meat packers, I called everybody I could think of, butchers that might have an answer. And I said, how on earth would you freeze an elephant? I said, when I called Bird's Eye, I talked to one of the scientists there, I said, if I stuck an elephant in the freezer, what would happen? It was silence on the other end of the line. He said, you'd have a crowded freezer. I said, well, yeah, I know that, but I said, how long would it take to freeze an elephant? He said, well, normal freezers are about, 10 below, maybe 10 above, 0. Probably take about 5 hours to freeze an elephant. I said, well, that's not going to work. I got to freeze my elephant in, he said it'd probably take about 5 days. I'm sorry. He said it'd take about 5 days to freeze an elephant. I said, that's not going to work because the food in the stomach's going to rot in 5 days. The acid's still working. It doesn't know he's dead. All it knows is it's acid. It's supposed to break this stuff down. I said, I need to freeze my elephant in 5 hours. They said, well, then you're going to have to find something 300 below 0, like liquid nitrogen. Well, it never gets 300 below 0 on Earth. The coldest it has ever gotten. Here's a map from National Geographic. They said the coldest temperature on Earth is minus 127. That's pretty chilly. I was up in Barrow, Alaska a few months ago where it gets to 80 below 0. That's chilly. But that's still not cold enough to freeze the mammoths. What happened? I talked to a guy when I was up in Alaska. He said, oh yeah, he told me he works in the oil field drilling for oil near Barrow. He said they drill down 1,000 feet through permanently frozen ground, permafrost, and hit trees. He said one day they were drilling and hit a tree, and they always take whatever they drill out and lay it on the ground beside them to go, develop a sample of what's down in the ground. He said they drilled straight through the top of a tree that was 300 feet tall, standing up. This is on the north slope of Alaska. Folks, I was just up there. There are no trees. We saw one tree growing in a Chinese restaurant inside, about this big. That's it. There are no trees in Barrow, Alaska. There are certainly no trees 300 feet tall. There are very few trees in the world 300 feet tall. Some of the redwoods are that size. But how do you get 300-foot tree standing up under 1,000 feet of permanently frozen ground? What happened? Well, I'm going to give the Hovind theory of what I think caused the flood in the days of Noah. We're going to give this in the next session mostly. I just give you a few things to consider. Now, many people have contributed to this. I'll take the blame for it if it's wrong. It's just a theory. Some people say, I think your theory wrong about this little point. Okay, then modify the theory. That's what it's for. It's to give you a skeleton to hang the meat on, okay? We're going to review a little science and then give you the Hovind theory. There's a law called the inverse square law, which says if two objects are attracted to each other, like the Earth and the Moon have gravity pulling them together, or two magnets, the force of attraction is inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. In English, that means if you brought it into 1/2 the distance, it would quadruple the attraction, not double it. Inverse square laws apply when you're dealing with forces involving gravity, light, magnetism, and girls. See, when you half the distance, the attraction is quadrupled, not doubled. Many guys don't understand that. See, I travel every week. I've been home 7 Sundays in the last 14 years, which means I get to come home every week. I get 10 feet away from my wife and it's, hello dear, how are you doing? You know, when you get 5 feet away, it's 4 times the attraction, not 2. When you get real close, it's just too late, okay? Overpowers all resistance at that distance. So, stay 10 feet away, guys, your problems will be solved. Anyway, next thing you need to consider, when a top is spinning, it behaves in a very peculiar way. If a spinning object is struck by something, like a gyroscope, if you bump it, it'll wobble for a while and then recover spinning, but it'll be spinning at a strange angle. Spinning tops follow actually a very predictable pattern when they're struck by something. Like gyroscopes, or with the bicycle wheels full of water that we have at Dinosaur Adventureland. Come over their entire thing with our bicycle wheels. That you get them spinning, and it's very hard to change the spin. But they follow a predictable path. You can actually determine when it was struck by tracing back the wobbling pattern and say, oh, it must have got hit right here. Okay? The Earth obviously has had different north poles. The Earth, today the Earth, they build your globes, you know, it's tilted over 23.5 degrees. Oh, it spins this way actually. But it's tilted 23.5 degrees. It wasn't always that tilt. There's quite a bit of evidence on this planet that the Earth had different tilts. Stonehenge, for instance, probably was built at a time to worship the sun or study the sun. But the Earth had a different tilt when Stonehenge was built. Same with Edixus and Amun-Ra. George Dodwell was the government astronomer for Australia for years, back from 1909 to 1950 something. He was the main astronomer for the government of Australia. He spent years studying the tilt of the Earth from historical data. He says the Earth was tilted differently down through time. He made a graph of the tilt of the Earth when the Earth is moving. He said the Earth's angle of declination in relation to its orbit around the sun is changing. He said after studying all this, it looked to him like something struck the Earth 4,350 years ago and made the Earth wobble for several thousand years. And now it's pretty stable. The North Pole's still moving a little bit, but basically it's pretty stable. But did something strike the Earth 4,350 years ago? Well, that's about the time of the biblical flood, you know. What happened? Today we're tilted over, and that's what causes the seasons. The Bible talks about summer and winter. The first mention of cold weather is after the flood, Genesis chapter 8. I know there were seasons before. There was apparently no cold weather before. So keep that thought in mind. Third thing, some of the planets have craters on them. The moon obviously has craters all over the place. Mercury has craters. Many of these, Mars has craters. What happened? What caused the craters on these planets? Mars has a canyon bigger than Grand Canyon, and there's not a drop of water to be found to be proven on Mars. And there's a canyon bigger than Grand Canyon. And this article says it was carved in an almost instant Grand Canyon when a lake overflowed. Now, why can they look at a canyon on Mars and determine it was formed very quickly, and they can't look at Grand Canyon on Earth and can't determine that was formed very quickly? Here you got plenty of water on Earth, almost no water on Mars. What's their logic here? And we talk all about it in this article here. You can read for yourself about the canyon on Mars forming very quickly as a lake overflowed. I agree. I think many canyons form quickly. There's an effect in physics called the Meissner effect. A magnet will actually float on top of another magnet. If you put two north poles together, one will float on top of the other. Japanese use this for their high-speed maglev trains. The Meissner effect. All this is going to tie in what we call the Hovind theory, but you need to have a little refresher in science here. What caused all this? There are comets flying around through space, but these comets are extremely cold, like 300 to 400 below zero. Don't lick them. How many of you have a piece of your tongue stuck to a pipe or a pump handle someplace in the world right now because when you were a kid, you were as dumb as me? Okay? My brother said, I bet you can't lick that pole. I bet I can. 10 below zero in Illinois, you know. Super cold things exist in space. cold enough to freeze the mammoths. Next week, we're going to cover some more of the Hovind theory of what caused the freezing of the mammoths, the Ice Age, and the flood, and Grand Canyon, and all that. So tune in again next time. See you then.